It's a uh, it's a it's a pleasure to have you all. I think we're remembering, as Jay articulated, a distinguished economist, a prolific writer, a dedicated teacher, and most of all, a profound public intellectual. Um, Last year, December 3, we lost our sir. Incidentally, December 3, 2023 was also his 74th birthday. People talk of his life as something that is full of struggles, uh, but I think we could remember it as a life full of successful articulation of dissent or defiance, I think, to the existing social structure and the existing power structure. I think he remembers in his autobiography that his mother told him to be best in whatever he did. And I think he was probably the best in articulating a radical dissent, at least in the context of Kerala and Kerala's developmental story. Um, in terms of his academic life, most of you would know his achievements, but a brief of it. He secured first rank in MA Economics from Calicut University. Then he pursued his MPhil from CDS and obtained a doctoral degree from CUSAT, in economics from CUSAT. He taught for almost three decades in University of Kerala. He also became a member of UGC, and for more than a decade, he also taught in this Tuljapur as a professor of economics. His academic work focused on land redistribution and socio-economic conditions of Dalits in Kerala. His publications include Development of Tribal Economy, State Level Planning in India, Globalization, a Subaltern Perspective. And he also was offered an award for the Kerala Sahitya Academy Award for his widely read autobiography called Ethiru. He did decline taking that award, but the biography or semi-autobiography, because he calls it more than an autobiography, it's a window into life of a Dalit in Kerala over years, and it gives a great idea of what his how he thought about economy, how he thought about life, how he thought about politics, and so I want to talk a bit on 2-3 points from there before I let the speakers take it up further. So when we read his autobiography, we get a feel of his expansive breadth and depth of his reading. So I don't think autobiographies you come across detailed analysis of various economic works, a typical autobiography. But here in his autobiography, we come to know about Smith's theory of moral sentiments and wealth of nations. He talks about Marx and how Marx's analysis is to be interpreted in the context of Kerala and in the context of analyzing anything in an economy. He talks about Amartya Sen, his capabilities, approach, and how do we interpret that for things happening around us. He talks about John Rawls, he talks about Ambedkar, he talks about Piketty. So you kind of get a feel of his expansive understanding of the economy through multiple lenses, and he's not restricting himself to any specific simple school of economics. We also see that from this biography that he's not somebody, he has a very balanced evaluation of people. He has a balanced evaluation of people, and Emmanuel, can you mute Indrajit's? Yeah. So I think his attitude towards how to balancely evaluate others comes from his. He says that he when he starts a class, he typically starts by saying this: I'm a person who has reverence for no one. You also should not revere me. I would not like it if you do. These are values which oppressed and subjugated me and people like me. I will not say you should not respect anyone, but not me, come what may. You don't require a role model. If you try to shape yourself looking at others, only inferiority complex will remain. And this is something he strongly believed in. I think he didn't revere anyone, and it is doesn't mean that he disrespected others. So he has a very balanced evaluation of people. So what we see is that people talk about his confrontation with K.N. Raj, which is kind of more popular. But there is an incident where he says he also discusses how the vice president at that time, K.R. Narayanan, doesn't he K.N. Kunhaman doesn't agree with what the vice president had to say about a GATT agreement. He says after reading his analysis that either the vice president has not studied this matter or he is indulging in self-deception. And as he says this, there are people who are very angry and they tell him to come down the stage and so on. But he stands by his views. And I think later when he meets K.R. Narayan, and he says that he was saying that having criticism is a good thing. And he liked that at least he criticized after understanding and detailed out the criticism. So in the same meeting, there is K.N. Raj, and where we kind of see him saying anyone who questioned Narayan was only displaying one's own ignorance. And it's interesting to find, like, when somebody gives a critique of K.N. Raj, we get responses similar to this without explaining why it is ignorance or anything like that. So Kunhaman didn't believe in any kind of reverence. And if a point has to be criticized, I think he was critical of the point. And despite fallout with Professor Raj, he says that he was in awe with his teaching. And he says later, when I was a research guide, I have always adopted the same approach as Raj. And he said, I would let the student learn. I will not say that they are wrong and so on. And he says, most of my guiding capabilities came from what I learned from Raj. So you see a balanced evaluation of people. There is no reverence, but it doesn't mean there is a consistent disrespect. So take good things from people. If the thing is good, you take it, and then, or you deal with it as it goes. So we see Kunhaman's attachment to the cause much more than any commitment to anybody or any party or any institution. And that is a fascinating thing that we observe in his biography. So one other thing, I think I'll finish with this observation. So one thing, he was also astute observer of the dynamics that is happening in the organizations. In one of the phases, he says, if one were to take a nationwide survey, there is a significant percentage of youth from Dalit Adivasi group which goes for higher education. This is a huge leap. It is during the period of implementation of economic liberalization that this increase was reported. The general understanding was that neoliberalism would adversely affect in the field of education, especially the backward classes. Proving this to be wrong, numerous students from these classes enrolled for higher education. In fact, a regulation has come forth that the campuses should be thrown open for Dalit Adivasi students. Earlier, Dalit Adivasi category people were not allowed into ICSR institutions, even if they were qualified. Today, there is a specific direction that they should be admitted. They also demand to be admitted. Not only this, when many campuses were examined, it came about that the number of other people who expressed solidarity with Dalit Adivasi protest is also on the rise. Progressive people from other communities stand in their support. This includes people from the upper caste as well. I think this observation is I think this event is kind of reflection of these observations. So what we have is that we have varied people who seem to be taking more solidarity into the cause, and also more Dalit Adivasi students who are expressing and articulating and asserting their views in a better way. And I think as a memorial event, we should, this event, and also we have a lot of people from varied groups attending the event, expressing solidarity and in also remembering him as a scholar, as a public intellectual more than anything. So I think these are some initial observations I wanted to make, and I would there are four speakers. I'll let them speak much more in detail about his intellectual legacy, about his work. I'll briefly introduce all four of them, not more than a line or two, because of the restrictions of time. We will start with Dr. Christabel, who is Associate Professor in Department of Economics with Kerala University. And she works primarily in the area of feminist economics and aspects related to microfinance and how it affects women's empowerment. Then we'll have Dr. Abhilash, who is the chair of the SCST cell at CDS. He's a faculty here and he primarily works in political economy. Recently, he's doing some work on social mobility among Adivasis, and he will talk next. Then we have Devika Dilip Kumar, who is a PhD student working primarily in the area of financial economics. And finally, we have Jaiseelan Raj, so senior lecturer in anthropology and international development. He works in the areas of plantation systems and agrarian relations, social inequality, discrimination, and racial capitalism. So without taking much more time, I think each of the speaker will talk for about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll have a wider discussion by audience. So I'll first invite Christabel to present her thoughts on and reflections on Professor Kunhaman's intellectual legacy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Respected Chair, Professor Tiagu Ranganathan, Dr. Abhilash, Ms. Devika Dilip Kumar, Dr. Jaiseelan Raj, and the dignitaries who joined online. I'm so honored to be speaking at the Professor M. Kunhaman Memorial event, Reflections on His Intellectual Legacy, organized by the SCST cell of CDS. I'm deeply grateful for this opportunity to pay tribute to my beloved teacher, Professor Kunhaman, who was not only my teacher, but also the supervisor, my mentor, but also, on the other hand, an exceptional human being. As I share my personal experiences with Professor Kunhaman, I am reminded of his remarkable legacy as a renowned economist, social scientist, and thinker. When I'm trying to reflect on my interactions with Professor Kunhaman, I'm filled with a sense of gratitude and respect for the impact he had on my life. I hope to share some of these personal anecdotes and insights highlighting the profound influence he had on me. I actually joined the economics department at the University of Kerala in September 1996. At that time, I was totally unfamiliar with Professor Kunhaman and I had never seen him before. However, as I began attending his classes, I was instantly drawn to his exceptional vitality, knowledge, scholarship, and genuineness in his thoughts. I was thoroughly captivated by Professor Kunhaman's teaching style, which led me to enroll in 3 different courses in the first semester alone. These courses comprised of his famous classes in development economics. That was a core and a mandatory subject, which we had to do it for our PG economics, as well as 2 elective courses, New International Economic Order and India's Economic Reforms. Notably, I was the sole student from my postgraduate class who opted for these elective courses because my peers, they were scared of Professor Kunhaman at the outset. So, however, I had the privilege of learning alongside the students from other departments, especially political science department, journalism department, and I observed the deep respect with which these students they have with my beloved teacher. I hope he also derived joy from teaching those courses, and he developed those courses in the form of a book in the later period. So the professor's teaching style was extremely remarkable. He usually prepared detailed notes for the classes, meticulously organizing them on index cards. They usually keep that cards in his pockets. So with these notes only, he would deliver the lectures that spans for hours together and that captivate us with his eloquent and engaging teaching styles. We were always mesmerized by his lectures. Although I revered Professor Kunhaman as a hero during my student days, I was totally unaware about his background and social challenges he had faced. In 1997, on the 50th anniversary of India's independence, the weekly news magazine published by the Malayalam Manorama, recognized 50 prominent Malayalis who were making significant contributions to Kerala's socio-economic sphere. Professor Kunhaman was featured as one of these 50 individuals. In a brief interview published in the news magazine, Professor Kunhaman shared his experiences, including his struggles during his younger years, when he had to fight against abject poverty as well as discrimination. The interview concluded with a poignant statement. I always carry my inferiority complex with me. I always desire that at least my daughter be free from that inferiority complex. Many of these harsh experiences are well documented in his autobiographical book, Edere. So, in this book, he has stated that the society in which he was born and raised gave him five enduring inheritances like poverty, fear, inferiority, lack of confidence, and lack of courage. However, as students who were fortunate enough to be around him for long years together, we never witnessed that kind of inferiority or lack of confidence or lack of courage he spoke about. On the contrary, Professor Kunhaman struck us as the most courageous individual we had ever met. He fearlessly challenged the systems around him, offering scathing critics of various institutions within the economy and the society. He embodied fearlessness and was unwavering in his convictions. His articulations always they were very clear and concise, reflecting his extensive reading and in-depth understanding of the nuances of social issues. Moreover, he was an attentive listener too, engaging with arguments put forward by the students and also foster a spirit of intellectual curiosity among the students who are around him. In 1999, I embarked on my PhD journey under Professor Kunhaman's guidance. So, in fact, I was the first student to complete a PhD under his supervision. As a guide, he was meticulous and rigorous too. He required me to rewrite my research proposal several times, ensuring that it met his high standards. Once he was satisfied with the proposal, he directed me to present it along with my research methodology and the tools for data collection before the panel of professors who were there in the department at that time for the final approval. Then only he allowed me to do the work. So Professor Kunhaman, even though he was very rigorous in that sense, he was incredibly supportive throughout my PhD journey, even during the challenging periods when I gave birth to two children during that period. So thanks to his unwavering encouragement and guidance, so that I could complete my research on time. Later, he left University of Kerala and joined TIS for his endeavors. But we met in between. Whenever he comes to Trivandrum, we try to meet up. Most probably, he used to come to the university for delivering some lectures or presenting papers in the conferences and so on. So Professor Kunhaman always share very notable thoughts, and that thoughts will be very having very provocative points embedded in it. One such event was on the Adivasi issue we have conducted in the Department of Economics some years back. So he always feel that economic empowerment among the Adivasis is crucial for their recognition and inclusivity in social strata of India. So he argued that the Tatas and Birlas must emerge from them. Then only they will receive the recognition they deserve in Indian society. So as an economist, I always feel that he support the approach which is based on normative reasoning. He argues that normative logic is not a negation of scientific reasoning. It can be scientific also. He always quote n number of scholars, including Heinrich Fromm, Sigmund Freud, or Thomas Piketty, and he always speak about the need for normative approach to the problems of the deprived and the dispossessed. His exposition on social exclusion, marginalization, etc., are always commendable. According to him, today caste cannot be the important factor in excluding social groups. Even gender cannot be. And exclusion can also take different forms, including digital exclusion, like digital haves and digital have-nots, where the people are facing the problem of resource haves and resource have-nots. So these people, they need not be necessarily be rich and poor, but the poor and the not poor, that kind of new divisions are emerging. So he always questioned the issue of power, and he says that power always kills creativity and the freedom promotes creativity. That is why he always argued for the instrumental role of power, property, which is there very much important for the people who are dispossessed and deprived. So according to him, property redeems, entitles, enriches, and empowers. Hence, the redemptive power of the dispossessed, according to Professor Kunhaman, is the property right. See, he also had a very clear vision about what development is all about. According to Professor Kunhaman, development should be evaluated on the basis of what happens to the underprivileged or the least privileged and not to the privileged. There can be growth and development, but the benefits are cornered by a small minority, and the underprivileged are totally neglected in the game which you can see around us. So these are some of the very thought-provoking points he has made when we usually interact with us, when he present papers or interact with our students and so on. In the later periods, he was very much attracted to Jittu Krishnamurti's books. Then he was always quoting one of the sentences from one of the books from Krishnamurti, that is, truth is a pathless land. So he says that as truth is a pathless land, nobody has found the truth for you. So the human mind has a peculiarity. It is highly fertile. It is a wonderful process, but it is not creative always. It is creative sometimes. It has to be idle at certain other times. So he was very much philosophical at the later periods of his life. So I was merely attempting to sketch a very humble caricature of the great economist and philosopher, Professor Kunhaman, from my own perspective. While individuals like myself may have been content with settling into comfortable mediocrity, Professor Kunhaman defied conventions and strove to leave a lasting impact among us. When I reflect on Professor Kunhaman's contribution to the academic community, his seminal contributions to economic thought, and his lasting influence on our generation and also to the future generations, I am often overcome with a sense of guilt as a student of the great teacher. Professor Kunhaman's profound impact and legacy have not received the attention they deserve. He was not heard with the depth of understanding he warranted. He was not loved and respected in the manner he deserved. His contributions were not recognized in the way they should have been. His place in the annals of Indian economic thought has not been properly acknowledged. He left an indelible mark, but it is essential that his legacy be recognized and celebrated in the history of Indian economic thought in a manner that truly does his justice. I hope initiatives like this will serve as a call to action, inspiring us to continue Professor Kunhaman's legacy and pursue his passions with renewed dedication and purpose. Thank you so much. I'm stopping here. Thank you for the great opportunity.
Thank you, Christabel. Thank you so much. And yeah, I think good that you raised those points on property right and wealth. So we had invited him in 2021 to give a talk during a ICSSR capacity building program. And he gave a talk called Towards a Subaltern Political Economy, Perspectives from the Margins. And I think there too, he raised this issue of how wealth means freedom. And in this, again, in autobiography, he keeps stressing this point of what property rights and wealth mean to freedom. And Milton Friedman and all, they seem to suggest market itself is something about freedom. Just having market means the freedom. But then Kunhaman kind of questions that by saying, without wealth, you don't get time to be free, time to work through things. And yeah, I think that's a thought I think he has developed. And yeah, it is very under recognized by the others in the academia. And I think hopefully we will build on it, others will build on it with more engaging with this thought. Thank you so much, Christabel, for that thoughtful reflections. Maybe we'll hear a bit more from Dr. Abhilash. He has already reviewed some of his work in the recent EPW article. So, and anyway, we'll hear more from Dr. Abhilash. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Tyagi, for the kind invitation and introduction. Can you hear us? Hear me?
Yeah. We can hear you. Yeah.
We have heard a very extensive comment, extensive experience from one of his students, and who closely worked with him for quite a long time. And there's no need to give any introduction to Kunhaman sir again. So I see him as a researcher. He's an intellectual with impeccable knowledge on effort and profound humility, and inspired youngsters, those who are afraid to venture into the rough terrain of the research. And I was one of them in the late 90s. And he, unlike his fellow teachers, as an intellectual and teacher, Professor Kunhaman has always loggerheads with the hierarchical order and his experimental context of human social context. So due to the time constraints, I think it's better to go through some of his intellectual journey. Especially, I would like to focus upon the 5 points in 15 minutes, and which includes his theoretical formulations and reinterpretation of the existing theories and his landmark studies and some of the comments which still have its own legacy and validity in this political economy sphere. And beginning with when we think about when we always have a talk with the Kunhaman sir, we always talk about the new economic order, which came into being, especially after the new economic order, especially in the 1990s. How that is impacting the marginalized, or he calls the subaltern groups. And he said that subaltern groups means those who are exploited by the dominant group, which includes Dalit and Adivasis, women and peasants in India, and indigenous peoples across the globe, those who are marginalized. And the popular political economic categorization of this global order was during the 90s, now it no more exists, was that the first, second, and third world. And the popular understanding that the popular explanation that the first world is exploiting the third world by using different means of exploitation and accumulation is happening. But what Kunhaman asked that we should move beyond the breakdown of these categories in order to understand the nuances of the inequality. And also see that a world elite of 20% rich people include elite in the first world, second world, and third world. And there is a third world of subaltern people living in the peripheries of the of these three worlds, I mean, first and second and third world, and also along with the rich politicians and the business class. What he says that by formulating such an understanding, that the traditional division of the world into first and second and third world, it sometimes oversimplifies the reality of the global inequality. The wealth and poverty, privilege and marginalization, that it always coexist across all the regions. And that blurred the boundaries between, or blurred the boundaries, creating a complex, interconnected web of socio-economic hierarchies. On this particular theoretical framework, he evaluated the status of the most oppressed communities in India. This brings him to his the major theoretical position, which always people are very vocal about, is that the subaltern economies, which he was ardently talked about, which is subaltern economies, or sometimes he also says that it's the indigenous economies. The large part of the society, the rationale which he gives is that the large part of the economy as a society lives and functions outside the perfectly competitive market economy. And especially most of the most marginalized Adivasis and peasant societies have been governed by the rules, which they have their own mechanism, and other than the logic of the market. So here, by doing such an observation, what he is trying to reiterate that it later proved right. The skepticism over the market-oriented growth because of the large section of the population living outside of this market. That is very true. Still, it is very true. In reality, the economic behavior of these subaltern groups it cannot be explained in terms of the mainstream economic theories and the market-based mechanisms. But at the same time, he also accepts the fact that these societies were influenced by these forces. That's the reality. But they did not fully change or adapt to this particular system. That we can see across India, there are different examples. Even after so many progressive legislation were also enacted. As a result, they stayed in the sideline. They're neither in the economy nor they're having a separate entity with their internal systems or remaining outside the capitalist network. And in short, their economic worldview seeks, when we see these people, their economic worldview always seeks in harmony with nature, preserving traditions, customs, and culture, and their, they ensure, or this ensure the self-reliance or sustainable development and passing their values to the future generation. That kind of a worldview they have. That it also has an economy axis that, he says that the contemporary market system is largely ignoring. And he also has the benevolence and the reflexivity by saying that in some places that the most of the modern economists are ignorant about the indigenous economy, which is quite true in its sense. That leads us to his third point about the significance of the empirical work, and that unravel the nuances of the life of the people, those who have been considered as very less miserable, or those who are always wanting the help of the government or the people for their welfare, which I am coming to the 1982 landmark study, which is conducted in Kerala. It is considered one of the landmark study in case of tribal communities in Kerala. And not only in Kerala, in the country, but why the reason is that he addressed them as an economic category. That was the first of its kind. And this was in this particular study, what he has done, that the study has divided the Adivasi community into two occupational categories. One is the settled agriculturists, the second is the wage laborers, and found the regional wise variations in developmental disparities, And it found that the state intervention at the same time, the kind of land use mechanism and the system that exists in that part of the world make their economy something different, which was a landmark study. That's what many call it as the studies related to Adivasis in Kerala can be divided into two. First came after Kunhaman's study, and study those who have come before Kunhaman's study. And he also raises a later part. Well, that was one of the major discussion point when he came to CDS in 2017 to inaugurate a program. Was that the criticism on the ongoing tribal studies? We raised the criticism that still the studies are considering the communities are very primitive, and they are always alleging that these communities are leading a very isolated existence. That created, he says that created the community as a pre-literate society, at the same time pre-agriculture with very less technology, and they are a small group, and they are largely geographically isolated. So putting the blame on them for the inclusion. And the policy formulation began from this point of view. That's a problem he always raises. It's not the case that it's because of their issue. They were exploited and isolated. And blaming their deprivation, that's what the point he was trying to make, on their own isolation in an easy escape route to the social hegemons. That's what he mentions. And whereas considering them as exploited puts the blame on the ruling class, because the ruling class always doesn't want to take the responsibility. Then comes to another important factor, important legacy, which I also feel that people always have a problem with understanding the grand narratives, grand theories. But Professor Kunhaman was a person who has very good understanding about the theories, and he has an inherent ability to explain that theory to the global, to the layman, to the common people, to the audience. So that's what I still remember by reading the autobiography of one of the tribal popular movement leader. She says that she used to attend Kunhaman Sar's lectures in order to get more knowledge about the rules and regulations that is related to the tribal communities. So here also I find that there was a discussion in 2002 about an article written by Professor Gopal Guru, how egalitarian is the social science in India, in which he coined on a theoretical term called theoretical Brahmins and empirical Shudras. He used to describe this theory as the caste divide that exists among the privileged class and the lower caste in Indian social science academia. Guru said that in India, social science has created a cultural hierarchy, dividing scholars into two groups. On the one side, there is a large group of researchers doing practical data and field-based research, often seen as less important. On the other hand, a small privileged group of theoretical experts are considered intellectually superior because of their ability to reflect, create theories. This divide in social science mirrors the caste-based idea of theoretical Brahmins and empirical Shudras. But what Kunhaman Sir did that he placed into the Kerala community, into our own backyard. He said that it's epistemic core and empirical periphery. Epistemical core means those who are building the knowledge system, knowledge power epistemic core, which is often controlled by the upper class and upper caste scholars, and who focus on grand theories and philosophies. Meanwhile, Dalit and Adivasi and marginalized scholars are expected to simply provide evidence and information. They hardly receive any due attention. And also at the same time, they also have the ethical duty to contribute to the subaltern epistemology, their own literature they have to produce. It's their responsibility. But the dominant groups use their privilege and caste superiority to maintain control and limit the opportunities of these emerging voices. That was one of the significant remarks he's made, which I said I felt is very worthwhile to remember now. The last, I would like to say that about his larger criticism about the developmental planning, which is also because the researchers have to take it very seriously. because the sole argument is making that the developmental planning had hardly any social provenance. It doesn't have any social place of origin. Put it simply, the popular slogan is always that the planning is for the people and for the people and by the people. But when it comes to the marginalized section, where were these people? These people were not there. The state-led bureaucratic development increasingly excluding these people. At the same time, people are not able to question the system as they were viciously submerged into the social as well as when it comes to Adivasis, they are in the spatial isolation or exclusion. Because and also he always saying that these people were never asked about the so-called development. Rather, their demands were largely centered around to retain or reallocation of their resources, which has been alienated from them by the state and its agencies. They have a long history of struggle of demanding land, water, and the resources which And he says that ever since the independence, the exceptional growth of policies encompassing practically everything and creating the illusion that the long-lasting benevolent state, which is very good in promising, giving promises, but seldom fulfilling its own promises and causing the frustration. And this he alleges that this it still has a research validity. It's that that kind of a policy framework debilitated the capabilities to create initiatives and enterprises among the weaker sections. Here, what he means that the paternalistic state, rather than raising the asset base of large. Later, many people have taken these comments. We are listening that. And these weaker sections has only maintained the dependency syndrome to the state. So that's what the point I would like to mention about, which has still large amount of validity when it comes to the policy implementation vis-a-vis the welfare of the most marginalized communities. This is the point I would like to make for the time being. I think the time is done. And unlike the few, I'm coming back to my the initial comment that unlike his fellow teachers, as an intellectual and teacher, Professor Kunhaman was always at loggerheads with the existing hierarchical power structure, and that proved him as a true intellectual who always inspired generations in the forthcoming time and the current generation as well. And thank you. I will join with the discussion.
Thank you, Dr. Abhilash. Yeah, I think, I think what you seem to suggest is about these classes, the way he sees classes and also how it dynamically changes. I think he keeps looking at these different classes and how they change classes of people and how things keep changing over time. It's a very dynamic analysis when it comes to his, I think in his book also he calls about a class called precariat, and then he says precariat is different from proliterate, organized proliterate. So you can't have the same analysis forever as proliterate and capitalist. So he says there is this precariat and how organized proliterate could get privileged over time and so on. So it's a very dynamic kind of analysis. So that is, anyways, thank you for sharing some of these. Now we'll hear from Devika. Devika is a student here. I think she's going to reflect on Professor Kunhaman's analysis from Amartya Sen's capability perspective, I think. Yeah, so yeah, Devika, welcome. And
yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. I think I'm audible, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So it's very happy to being a part of this event, and it's very honored to speak about the pioneering works of Professor Kunhaman, and whose insights have greatly shaped our understanding of marginalized communities and economic systems. So I'll be going for some of the insights is what Abhilash sir already gave in his previous speech. So I'm going to speak a little bit about his academic contributions, especially the subaltern group and the amelioration of Kerala model of development. Okay, so Professor Kunhaman built on the ideas of the thinkers like Jyotirao Phule and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, emphasizing the importance of studying the economics from the perspective of a marginalized community. And one of the important contribution is like that he showed how the dominant Brahmanical system used the history to oppress the lower caste groups, creating false identities to keep them in subjugation. Professor Kunhaman was committed to objectivity and used a scientific approach to explore the caste experiences and the institutional discrimination which is present, especially in Kerala. So, according to him, the idea of subaltern economics. So, what exactly he was trying to explain by the term subaltern economics is like focusing on the economic behavior of marginalized communities such as Dalits, Adivasis, and others. So, Professor Kunhaman also made global comparisons linking the struggles of marginalized groups in India to those faced by the Black communities in Africa, indigenous people in Americas, and the Aboriginals in Australia. So, what is the idea of what are the insights he given about the globalization and the conditions, or the what is the experience of subaltern groups and its effect, the globalization effects on subaltern groups. So he was actually criticizing the fact of criticizing the globalization, particularly its effects on marginalized communities, and he created a framework to analyze how the global economic policies often worsen the inequalities, which already mentioned the previous speakers, and benefiting the elites while leaving the subaltern groups without opportunities. And he also pointed out that the global market fails to consider the unique needs of local economies, especially those of the marginalized communities. And if you're coming to the Adivasi studies and the land rights, we can see that he made a significant contribution to the Adivasi studies. He highlighted how land rights played a crucial role in empowering the Adivasi communities. And in southern Kerala, especially, where legal protections on land use helped Adivasis achieve greater mobility, they had more opportunities than their counterparts in the northern side of Kerala. So, but unfortunately, the government failed to act on his recommendations for policies that could help these communities, leaving them marginalized. So that was already mentioned, like the lack of representation of the marginalized communities in the policy making was one of the major contribution, or one of the major finding which made by Professor Kunhaman. So coming to the Kerala model of development, we can see that Professor Kunhaman analyzed the Kerala model of development, which was one praised by the thinkers like Amartya Sen and Jean Dries. So they recognized that the political activism, especially from the marginalized sections of the society, made Kerala stand out. What made Kerala different here is one of the important questions. According to Professor Kunhaman, what wasn't just anti-caste activism, but the comprehensive land reform program that addressed the issue of caste, class, and gender together. So he believed this model was more inclusive than others in India. So we know that there are a lot of this kind of revolution things happens across India, but this was a major thing which is distinct Kerala from other part of the country. So he was also concerned about the knowledge and education system existing in our society, and he was concerned about the commercialization of education. He warned that the making education a commodity would reinforce the existing inequalities and will definitely exclude the marginalized groups from the fully participating in society's development. So Professor Kunhaman was not just an academic, he was a visionary, and his works was inspired scholars and activists alike, and his focus on challenging systemic inequalities continues to guide our thinking today. As we reflect on his legacy, let's commit to create a more inclusive and equitable world. And thank you so much for giving the opportunity. So I'm stopping here as of now. Thank you.
Thank you, Devika. Yeah, good that you raised the point of land reform. I think Kunhaman gives a very important critique of land reform in Kerala. I think he says how actually land reform did not turn out as it is positioned as. It was not land to the landless, but more land to the farmer or tenant, and he expands more on that. So I think that was the starting point of his critique of Kerala model. I think one of the pillars of his critique of Kerala model. I think we have the best person to elaborate more on that. Next, thank you, Devika. So we have with us Jayasilan Raj, and I think among things we know, he's recently writing a book on Dalits and Kerala, the egalitarian paradox, Dalits and the state in Kerala. I think it is I think without Kunhaman's work, maybe this would not have happened, and this is what I believe. I think Jay will also agree, and maybe I'll let him speak on his reflections on Professor Kunhaman's work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Tiago, for the invitation, introduction, Abhilash, as well. And thanks to the previous three speakers for a fantastic introduction to, and it actually complements each other's points, and it provides a very holistic, very depth and sort of heartfelt, very sincere analysis and understanding of Professor M. Kunhaman. And as everyone pointed out, he was an intellectual par excellence. And that's something often overshadowed by his experience during childhood, which are very important in my view to take on board, but reducing him to his immediate identity, to borrow from Rohit Vemula, would be a huge mistake. And we have seen that huge mistake has been performed again and again in many contexts. So I will just start by saying how I met Professor Kunhaman. I was a student of BA in History at University College Trivandrum in 2002. When I came to Trivandrum over the first year, I was a decent student, I guess. So, of course, I was also a Dalit. So the questions I often got is, do you know Kunhaman? And they never asked me if I know anyone else, if I know any other professors who may be a historian, for example. I was a student of history after all. But the question I always got, whether I know Kunhaman. What is between me and Kunhaman is that maybe both we are Dalits, right? So casteism and reduction to caste identity doesn't come from who actually employ anti-caste politics, but those who, in their laying out of people within a prism, those who position and reduce certain people to caste, they should be ashamed of it. But eventually, the good thing out of that is that I went and looked for who is Professor Kunhaman. So a friend of mine was a student at doing MA in political science, and he took me and he introduced me to Professor Kunhaman, and that's the beginning of a very long and intellectually stimulating, beautiful relationship, I would call it. And I think perhaps I should reflect from a very marginal position as an anthropologist, not as an economist. And since previous speakers have fantastically summarized his points, I would just generally reflect on what was Kunhaman as an intellectual. For me, the most important thing is that he was a guerrilla fighter. When I say guerrilla fighter, a very, very important fighter, but fight from the margins, who can see everything at the center, but those who at the center can't see him, right? And that's how he always made dominant intellectuals in Kerala and outside Kerala. He made them uncomfortable most of the time because he challenged not only their association with the reproduction of power, being part of institutionalizing state mechanisms, because Kunhaman was, after all, an anti-institutional thinker. But he made them uncomfortable, not only by questioning their theories, their arguments, for example, on the claims of Kerala development model. Of course, he would agree with certain validations, but of course, and he will question what I would call as the sort of subnationalist sentiments embedded in the Kerala development model claims. And he made them uncomfortable often not just by questioning their arguments, but by questioning the very foundation of their concepts, the tools that they employed to understand what development means. So rather than just looking at whether the claims within Kerala development model is empirically valid or not, what Professor Kunhaman was interested in understanding what kind of development they were talking about. Therefore, questioning the variables that are used, the way that it's calculated, its way it's hierarchically locate communities and how it invisibilizes certain communities by highlighting certain kind of statistics. Because after all, Kunhaman realized that there is a huge seduction in quantification. And as an anthropologist, of course, I see that he went beyond what I would call as economistic approach to understanding development. So Kunhaman questioned the very foundations, foundational concepts and the tools the tools employed by those intellectuals. To give you an example, when he talked about class, and I just want to go back to what the previous speakers mentioned, that when he talked about class, he also understood it as a very socially encompassing idea, right? It's a very grounded understanding of class. So we can't actually reduce it either to a Marxian understanding of class or a Weberian understanding of class. Both has its own limitations because Marx never wrote, and he was not bothered about caste. Weber, also bothered about caste, didn't take on board as a center of concern in his analysis of social class. So the problem with the dominant intellectuals is that they couldn't sort of position Kunhaman's intellectual capacity because he negated the very basics of the dominant tools. Therefore, they of course always went on to talk about his positionality, often reducing him to being a Dalit. So in all kinds of issues and concerns raised here in this event, in adding to the points raised here, I would say that Kunhaman was primarily also concerned about the phenomenon of autonomy. He states explicitly in some context, but it is very much implicit wherever he talks about, for example, power, because for Kunhaman, power was multipolar and pervasive, and that needs to be challenged rather than accumulated. And wealth, which he connects again to, as mentioned earlier, to freedom and power. And also, he talks about development and state in relation to the question of power. But in all those concerns and institutions, phenomenon he discussed, he emphasized on the point of autonomy for the marginalized communities. When I say autonomy, it is not limited to the sovereignty of state, it is not limited to self-rule, but creation of an autonomous space around them in controlling their life. In controlling their life and being respectful to others' life. And it is a call for de-alienation, I would say. So if he actually centers autonomy as a central aspect to Kunhaman's thinking, one realizes how deeply egalitarian it is. And that's where he doesn't identify himself to dominant theoretical stance. His concern was not to prove or disprove dominant intellectual positions, because Kunhaman was not committed to either Weberianism or Marxism or post-structuralism. What he was all committed to the autonomy of the most marginalized. And therefore, he looked at all kinds of tools wherever possible, in whatever possible ways. And he was so sincere and committed in looking at them, and often went beyond politically correct narratives about being a left or a right or the centrist. And it again connects to the earlier point about this is the reason why the dominant paradigm, dominant intellectuals who identify themselves with these dominant paradigms in a very subnationalist sentiment couldn't understand what Kunhaman was saying, because he completely negated their paradigm, because his concern and his own subnationalist sentiments lies with the most poor. So if anyone who is a true intellectual of 20th century Kerala, who was deeply committed to the cause of the marginalized, not only Dalits but also Adivasis and other marginalized communities. It was Kunhaman who was truly a radical egalitarian scholar. So we should remind ourselves that the kind of intellectual institutional politics that we see today is quite different from the time Kunhaman came to universities in the 70s and 80s, where you hardly had any Dalits studying in universities, let alone in economics or history disciplines. So therefore, although Kerala had a very vibrant Dalit political public intellectual space, you didn't have that sort of space in academia. So in addition to his intellectual and his research and his whole contribution as a public intellectual, we should credit him with creation of a public space to talk about caste and Adivasi issues in the university space, because until Kunhaman, perhaps these were not identified as issues worth of exploring. Rather, they were all clustered maybe into the point of outliers. So Kunhaman, as a guerrilla fighter, as a marginal scholar, of course, that's what we can expect from him, that he looks at the outliers and he make the outlier the center of his intellectual pursuit, unlike other dominant intellectuals of his time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jayasilan, for that wonderful description of what Professor Kunhaman was. I think throughout his book, he talks also transformative politics. I think what he did and what he tried to understand was this transformative politics rather than other kinds of politics. So, yeah, and thank you all the speakers for keeping the time. Hardly has there been an event where 4 speakers kept their time so perfectly. I think we can clap ourselves for that, a small clap maybe, but we can. So that also means we have some time for questions, comments, discussions, their reflections on Professor and Kunhaman. Uh, so if people can raise their hands, and then I can ask people to question, or can also tell that if there is a question, or you can use the chat window. Any of these measures are fine. Yeah, and if you are having any questions for the speakers, please mention which speaker you have the question for.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, Vishnupriya, yeah.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Mhm.
I feel so honored. I don't know what to say, to listen to all the speakers and from you till Jay Sheelan, sir. I got this message from them. I'm connected to Jay Sheelan, sir, and Abhilash, sir, also, because from the capacity building workshops they have conducted in CDS. And somewhere I'm also exposed to this Kunhaman sir's work, and I've always wondered why he was always neglected or not seen or heard enough while considering Adivasi studies, because I myself was pursuing Adivasi studies and I had a lot of doubts or some kind of resistance doing it in Kerala. I myself was from Trivandrum. So I feel this initiative and this memorial lectures very foundational, and so grateful for all of you to take all the little or big efforts to revive a scholar like him. Um, yeah, that's all, sir. I don't know. I am just kind of overwhelmed. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thank you, Vishnupriya. Any comments anybody wants to make, the speakers? Jesilan, any comments on this, or Abhilash, Christabel? Okay, fine. So, yeah, maybe we can have more comments or questions from others.
Can I ask, Tiago?
Yeah, Professor.
I don't know where to
Yes.
raise my hand. I can't see the
That's
thing.
okay. Yeah, you can
So,
talk
no,
now.
I
Yes,
just wanted
yes.
to know because when he was in CDS, that time he was not so prolific, so I really didn't sort of keep in touch with his writings. But given what people are saying about his writings and what I've also read elsewhere, what were his views on Dalit women? I mean, in the sense of how subordinated they were. How did you see their advance in a society undergoing globalization? Did he have any specific views on that? I'm hearing people mentioning gender, but nothing more specific than that. So that's why I just wanted to know anyone who can answer that.
Yeah, any volunteers to answer? I see them.
Shall I?
Yeah. Just
From my limited reading, I mean, so I think in his method of very grounded analysis of, for example, on globalization, liberalization, he often comes to the question of gender. In particular, the implications of gender as a category for the marginalized communities, but also he compare it with what it means for other classes. So he foresaw in a way what later comes as analysis of Dalit women in relation to, for example, upper caste women, as in terms of its relative autonomy. So one of the contributions I would say is in identifying the relative autonomy, but also within the limits of changing economic reforms, decentralizations, and on the question of representation. Thank you.
Christabel, would you want to add something in the
Yeah.
informal discussions? Yeah, or something. Yeah, Mridul, you want to add something?
Yeah, I know. I just wanted to say, now we are reading a lot about intersectionality. When we're looking at gender, we should not think of them only as women, but they're also Dalits. It could also be, other types of identities. So was there any such writing of his saying that they are in a way doubly disadvantaged, not even just being a woman, but also being a Dalit? That's sort of a strong writing on his part. That's what I wanted to actually. What we call now intersectionality.
Right. Yeah, I'll also add Suraj's point. Seems similar, but you can decide. So Suraj has written on Jayasilan's opening point about the dangers of reducing a self to an identity. I think this is slightly different, but maybe we can take both the question. In the case he mentioned caste identity, as it is an important point, please elaborate a little more, especially reflections on multiple identities and contradictory selves, and reflections on the inevitable tensions in bringing the abstract idea of plural identities to the practicalities of dealing with people and thinking of social interventions.
Is it okay? It seems a question.
So it seems like a question to you, but yeah.
It's a very, very loaded question. So it may take some time for me to even think through it. So I will take it as a comment, but also just to maybe just to think about the question. I would say that the problem is it's often people who raise anti-caste politics are reduced their caste position. So that's where we hear a lot of comments about like identity politics, in Malayalam as they call it Sottavadam, without actually looking at what sort of identity politics that is. And it could not, it doesn't need to be identity politics at all, right? So when someone like Professor Kunhaman raises the question that in development discourse, these communities are invisible, he is called as someone who is a Dalit, just calling for the fair share of Dalits, or maybe reduced to Dalit politics, right? But those who are actually making decisions, they are not called for their caste positions. So if you look at the policy making in Kerala, CDS working papers had, I think, huge influence over the way development discourse was set up in the 70s, 80s, 90s. But if you go through the early working papers in CDS, barring 1979 paper by Professor P. Shivanandan, maybe until 2000, you hardly have any papers talking about caste as an issue. So if someone raises caste, so sort of invisibilizing caste within the development discourse, it's not called as casteist, right? It is maybe called as a general oversight. So who becomes casteless, right? It's people who are either caste blind or casteist, or casteist, anti-casteist. Could be they are not called as they are not reduced to their identity. So for example, I have seen some comments on why, for example, Kunhaman, Professor Kunhaman is reduced to his Dalit identity. I have seen this comment especially when Dalit organizations either organized lectures on his memory, or they invited Dalit scholars. So it's actually, that itself shows the level of ignorance, because inviting a Dalit scholar is not reproducing his caste position. You could, it depends on how do you see Kunhaman. Do you see him as a scholar who studied, who is an expert on the political economy, anthropology, and inequality, marginality of marginalized communities, that mainly Dalits and Adivasis? Or do you just see him as a Dalit scholar, right? So if you are understanding, if you are actually positioning him as a scholar who studied Dalits and Adivasis, and therefore there are many Dalits and Adivasis who are also scholars of Dalits and Adivasis. Therefore, if a Dalit scholar gets an invitation, suddenly the criticism is that they are casteist. So does that mean, let's say we being a true casteless communities, we invite a set of non-Dalit, non-Adivasi scholars in discussion. And this includes, of course, Professor Kunhaman has experienced in his lifetime, because he was denied a position at the University of Kerala initially, because there was no position. It was not a reserved position. So this understanding that the general sort of position, which are like open category, is reserved for the upper caste, it was very much institutionalized. So it doesn't come from someone's personal stereotypes, personal misunderstanding. It is the whole system, right? So we heard these stories even before with K.R. Narayanan, but later we hear about Professor Kunhaman. Of course, we heard about Ambedkar also in that context. So the point is to reflect on who is actually casteist. Is it people who are raising anti-caste oriented questions, or those who argue for a post-caste society, or to argue that caste is there but it is not that important, or those who make a claim on for a multiculturalism. which is very apolitical, without looking at the dimensions of hierarchy, privilege, power embedded in it.
Vijay Sivan, yeah, I think I'm reminded even when in the death of Kunhaman, Professor Kunhaman was reported as Dalit scholar in some papers at least. Dalit scholar Kunhaman is no more. So again, who is being this identity, who is establishing this identity is not so clear. And yeah, any other comments or any responses to this? Or Thaku has raised hand. Yeah, Thaku. You can unmute and ask your question.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible. Can you also
So,
introduce yourself a bit before?
yeah.
That
Okay,
yeah, fine.
Okay. So my name is Thaku, and I'm a PhD scholar at TISS Mumbai.
Okay.
So, and I have been a student, a very proud student of Professor Kunhaman.
Oh, great.
So
Yeah.
I do agree with Jayasila and Raj sir, because even when we are asking questions not about today's lecture, why do we feel the need of asking why didn't he or did he talk about the Dalit woman specifically? Because when we were attending his lectures, he did talk about the gender, and he brought that topic in the classrooms. He also talked about the how women labor was marginalized and what it was not taken into consideration while we discuss the development, gender and development. So we also need to reflect when we are narrowing down his identity as a Dalit scholar, what kind of questions we are raising about him and his intellectual capacity, because it is not necessary a Dalit scholar should talk about only the Dalit issues. He did talk about it, but he was more than that, more than his Dalit identity. He was an intellectual par excellence, I would say, and we should celebrate him. Like, I don't want to criticize anyone here, but then the kind of questions we as students, scholars, and professors, we still feel that why what did he do about Dalits? He did talk about the Dalit struggle, but he was more concerned about the holistic topics and more larger issues than just, I think, Dalits. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I just react to this, because it's a very important thing that Thaku has said. I'm very sorry if I gave that impression that I am trying to ghettoize the Dalits. That was not the point at all. But it's good that you said one should not always think, why should someone only talk about Dalit women? I was not saying that. What I meant was, because nowadays we talk about intersectionality, and we say that in most of the schemes and programs of the government, for instance, the marginalized communities get more and more marginalized because they're not considered at all. So should we not take up their problems and issues separately? You see, that's one of the arguments that is going on now. So it was in that context, but I'm very glad, and I'm very sorry if I gave that impression, Taku, that I am trying to say that Kunhaman, what did he say about Dalit women? I meant that because this was such a big concern, did he have anything specific to say? Okay, but I'm sorry for giving that impression, and I'm glad you raised this point. Thank you.
Okay, Professor Mridul. Any other comments? Professor Devika, maybe you have met Kunhaman, anything you want to reflect on? In general, apart from what was discussed? Hello.
Yeah.
For
me, Dr. Kunhaman is a memory that goes back to the 1980s, when he was still at the Kerala University. So he was such a famous teacher, he was he was one of the few teachers that I know from that time who knew how radical a space the classroom is. Most of the teachers that we know, that I knew at least in Trivandrum at that time, in Kerala University at the time, well, for them, classroom was a matter of routine, giving some information, asking students a few questions at the best. generally finishing whatever they used to call portion. But Dr. Kunhaman's classes were stellar. And by the way, I never was his student directly. We had heard so much of him, of his prowess as a teacher. We would approach him and ask for special permission to sit in his lectures. And he would allow. This is a funny thing. I was only in my BA back then. I was only a BA student, but I go to him and say, then he'll say, you must come you can't come without reading. So he would give some little bit of reading just to test you actually, whether you're serious or not. But because he was such a figure, we would all read. Three of us who would go to his class would definitely read. And I think he used to find it very amusing, because those of us who were not even in the MA were like trying very hard. It was difficult, of course, for our level. But we were trying so hard to sit in his class. What I therefore, he's one of the teachers who really changes you in the classroom. The classroom is a space where he really demolishes whatever, what standard ideas. So, I always had this niggling feeling in my heart, the story about, doubt in my heart about women's literacy and other, healthcare, etc., being somehow the shining achievement of Kerala model. And because I always asked this, there was always this falsification, that I used to have, like, ask, okay, if that is the case, then why are women not treated better? Why are women treated badly? So this was never a question you could ask in any other classroom. Never. I think even now you can't ask. From whatever I'm seeing everywhere, including at CDS, what I'm seeing is you really can't ask that question. You're immediately through some circuitous, way, you are shut down. You're shut down. So likewise, but this was the only class where you could ask that question. And he would then, again, he would stop wherever he was. In fact, he would really take you in so many different directions. The other person who had the skill, but in a different way, was Dr. Salim Balakrishnan, who taught me. He also had this ability. He would be talking about, say, something, and then he'll take off in a tangent into something else. Likewise, Dr. Kunhaman was able to, he would be teaching something. So if you asked a question, he would stop, and then he would refer to another body of literature and bring your attention to so many exciting things happening, so exciting kinds of questioning happening in other forms of literature. And miraculously, at the end of the class, he would bring back all of it and tie it together in a way that made things so clear. So some of his teachings, like, for example, I still remember him discussing this Bordelion report on forest management, the first Bordelion report on forest management in Travancore in the late 1890s. From there, he actually traveled into all kinds of things, on eco-Marxism, on ecological Marxism. Then took us through all kinds of ravines and, highways, byways, everywhere. And then brought us right back to the report and gave us a whole set of new lenses to read that report. So, for me, Dr. Kunhaman is what should I say? He's an eye opener. He's someone who opened my eyes. That is what I always remember him. And that is why his passing was so heartbreaking. It was not at all easy to accept, though of course it was his choice. And I think some of us knew that this is the only way he's going to live. He's never going to suffer. He was not going to be seen as, a decrepit old man. This much I know. But still it is so hard to accept the fact that, I don't know, some of the bolsters in this world are falling off. As I grow, and I grow older, I feel some of the people that gave me the kind of energy to continue being an academic, they are passing. So his passing has taken a toll on me. It's not easy for me to come to terms with that. And thank you so much for organizing this. We need to come together like this even more frequently. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Devika, for those reflections. Yeah, I think we were discussing about his teaching and like at the age of 58, where everybody would opt to retire, he moves to Tuljapur and teaches there for about 12 years. I think that's really an inspiration. And so in that sense, if at all I could get that inspiration at even 58,
So
I'd be more
I
than
was in that
happy.
class too,
Yeah.
you know.
Okay,
I have
okay.
asked his permission to go and sit in that class also.
Oh, okay. Great. Yeah. So he taught till 70, and then again he was at MG University as a Nelson Mandela Afro-Asian chair. So
Yes,
I
yes.
think so much. So continuously working and teaching seem to be among many things his real passion. So thank you, Devika, for those reflections. Anybody wants to add something to that? Anything on his teaching or any other? Right. Okay, I think we are reasonably well on time in terms of organizing this. I think we made a small mistake. We should have called this first Professor Kunhaman memorial event. That would have been much more clearer. But whenever we do the second, we would put second to that, and there'll be more events recognizing his intellectual legacy. And we also anticipate other institutions, organizations, universities to take initiative and remember him, celebrate him. We are looking forward to those events, looking forward to participating in them. And if whether those happen or not, by the next year, we will get back with the second event from our side. Thank you so much. Any closing remarks from any of the speakers or? Okay. Yeah, and yeah, thank you so much to Abhilash and Jayasilan. They initially thought through this and said this is something we should do, and Abhilash got into it. And thank you so much, Christabel, for reasonably short notice you came, and Devika for coming up with a lucid talk immediately. And yeah, thank you all for joining and celebrating Professor Kunhaman's intellectual legacy. Thank you so much, and I'll maybe we can close this event. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Uh,
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Christopher.
Thank you. Thank you, Abhilash.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Tiago sir. And thank you, Jashilan. We'll meet again. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, Arvind. Hey, thank you.
Yeah, I'm from Mumbai, sir.
Okay. Fine. Thank you so much. So,
Very intellectual talks were there, and really we could say not out of thanks, but really a brief idea about Dr. Kunhaman we could get.
Great. Yeah, that is the
And,
idea.
I think it should be organized on a regular basis. And let's be very frank. I am from Mumbai. I was with Air India. I am a retired HR. I put up to 32 years of service. What happens? See, I was involved with the association also, but just don't take it to the heart. But I could tell you something. In our association, we had people from all the part of the country, but nobody from Kerala I had seen participating in the association, which literally pinched me. And when I came to know about Dr. Kunhaman, I had read it in the newspaper, also in our Marathi newspaper. A big article had come about Dr. Kunhaman and all. But then I don't understand why people, when they come to other states or wherever you move around, why you feel ashamed to tell that you belong to a downtrodden. Why? What's going on? Why a person who fought for us today, whatever the fruits we are enjoying, is because of Dr. Ambedkar's efforts. Equally, we should not forget that. And see, the position, power is for a few few days, few years. But the legacy has to count now. Today we are remembering Dr. Kunhaman for his intellectual legacy. Today, wherever you go for intellectual talks or seminars, they want people who have worked. Okay. They want people who have worked for Adivasis and all. But they don't want
Arvind, we'll talk over personally. Yeah, now I think most of the people have left. I will say, you got the email. I think you would have got from my phone number. We could discuss in detail at some point. Thank you so much though for coming, and thank you for expressing your views. But it's just that this is towards the fag end, so we'll do this discussion later. Okay. Thank you for your involvement, Arvinda. Yeah. Okay. So I declare this meeting closed, and
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
yeah. Okay. Thank you. Bye. Yeah.